creating a world where people can say, I'm sorry, I've got that wrong, is just going to be more advantageous for everyone, including and especially business performance. I think it's absolutely critical because then people own it. People feel more connected to each other. They feel safer. Then you can identify mistakes easier and say, Brian, I know you've said sorry 3 times for this thing. Let's talk about it because it's clear it's happening regularly, as opposed to, as you say, you're frantically trying to hide errors.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Day One Diaries, the podcast where we speak to founders and instead of asking, why are you so successful? We ask, why did you start this business? How did you start this business? In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Tony McGaharan. Tony is the founder of the People Playbook, a company that provides learning and team development experiences for companies all around the world. Now, Tony has a storied journey and we talk about the roles he used to have and what led him to starting up his business. There's lots of highlights to this conversation, but in his own words, let's focus on 3 points. First of all, certainty amid the uncertainty. Tony wasn't sure exactly how the business would grow, what type of clients he would get, but he was sure about the type of experience he wanted to build, the positive, uplifting space he wanted people to be in before they get ready to learn. This carries through to today as they talk about being practical, purposeful, and playful in the sessions they deliver. Secondly, you'll hear him talk about the resilience in the early days. He spoke about how the business began around COVID and some early contracts just disappeared. He soon realized this was actually a competitive advantage as everyone was on the same level playing field and he had an opportunity to win over new clients. Lastly, he spoke about how a personal tragedy led him to understand that he was the bottleneck in the business, how he needed to let other people lead from the front to drive the business to their latest phase of growth. This was such a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And remember, if you want more content like this, hit subscribe because we'll have a new episode of Day One Diaries every 2 weeks. Enjoy the show. Tony, great to have you on Day One Diaries. It's T-Mac and B-Mac having the crack.
All the Macs are invited.
Good to have you here, seriously. So, love you to get us started and just tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your business.
So my name's Tony McGaharan. I'm CEO and founder of People Playbook, and we create purposeful, practical, and most importantly, as you know, Brian, playful learning experiences for organizations across the world.
Nice. Purposeful, practical, and playful.
That's much sharper than it ever was. So I feel I'm proud of that intro.
Yeah. You sound like you're hitting on the branding there. Very good. Your PR team will be delighted with you. But let's can you go a little further? You create people training experiences. Is that what you do?
Yeah, I see them as learning experiences. I don't use the word training personally, Brian. I find training to be more about kind of very specific sort of, I don't want to say the way we would train monkeys, but that's what comes to mind, rightly or wrongly, when I think of the concept of training. I think for adults in the workplace, where possible, I want it to be an experience. And that's what I would want for me on the receiving end. So very much about, creating an opportunity for them to socialize with one another, come to terms with new sort of concepts and insights, and then really put them into practice.
Right. And when you say you try and make them more playful and practical, can you give us an example of the type of learning experiences that you run?
Yeah, what makes them practical and playful, Brian, is your question? Well, practical is you can do something with it. How many, learning experiences, trainings have we been to that you come away and you're like, that was interesting, but not very useful? So we want to make sure that we're high on the usefulness. And then the playful is really what I think is one of our core differentiators, and that separates us from perhaps other partners that work with organizations. And I think critically, as you'll know firsthand, Brian, there's a balance between making sure it's playful and not gimmicky, or playful and not silly, because we're working with adults. And I suppose, what does that look like? We bring in aspects of play and gamification. I've just cleared away in order to prepare the visuals for those of your listeners that are watching this instead of listening to it. Lots of Play-Doh. We've got some Lego in here. Those are examples of tools that we use to increase the playfulness. But really, Brian, it's also just about bringing some levity to the whole thing and some lightness, because oftentimes work is hard and it requires sort of, deep concentration and focus, and it can be quite a heavy lift at times. So what we try to do in our experience is make it lighter and therefore more accessible, more inclusive, and then hopefully you leave inspired, ready to do something different.
It's so interesting the way you describe it, because it seems so intuitive when you talk about it, because like no one learns anything when they're in a bad mood, right? So being able to bring on an experience where people are feeling good and feeling upbeat, and I know you put on music and you bring comedians and you like to bring on a show so people are feeling good and really enjoying the vibes, and then learning on the different concepts, etc. Those things are make a huge difference for whether people absorb it, whether people appreciate that you and their company has put on those trainings. So I think it's a really interesting way to look at it. And while it's not something that would jump out of you, once you say it, it's like makes complete sense. That's fantastic. That's cool, man.
Yeah, well, look, as you say, it's somewhat intuitive, and we all know it. We all know good experiences when it comes to learning as adults, and we know bad experiences. And I think what has happened in the world of quote unquote facilitation and quote unquote workshops is that we've established habits in the industry and in the market that are just constantly used, and I think they're not thought out more, and they're not critiqued more. And what we try to do is do that, because as you said, like, you can't learn when you're bored, and you certainly, and equally, you can't learn when you're overly stimulated and that it's too playful.
Mm.
And so that is where the art and the science in these learning experiences, comes into play, right? We think about, what's the evidence say, what's the research say, how can we bring tried and tested strategies and actionable insights to the conversation and to the workshops. And then there's the art, which you mentioned. Yes, we work with a brilliant comedian called Jared Christmas, who is a Kiwi living in England, and we'll bring him to events to help create that slightly elated, positive state where actually learning can really take place in the best possible way. As you know, we work with two brilliant live musicians, Lucy Robinson, Rebecca Fitch, each of whom, as well as Jared, are all in the performing arts world, and they're doing their own thing. But when it comes to our events, we try and prioritize them being there, because they bring so much in creating that right environment, as you described.
Excellent, excellent. So we'll come back to People Playbook in a little bit, but I'd love to take a step back and talk a little bit about the jobs you had previously before you decided to start up the company. So what was your role before you started People Playbook?
So early jobs, yes, I think that the common thread throughout my career, which I think most of us do, right? We look back and we say to ourselves, how did we get here? What was day one for not the business that we've started, but the career path that we found ourselves on? And everyone's is different. And to quote a good friend of mine, Helen Tupper, he talks about squiggly careers, right? So it's a bit of a mess, but the one kind of thread throughout for me has been education. I've been into coaching sport back as a young person, around 16, 17. I started doing that. Then I did a teacher training degree, and that was training to become a teacher, very much focused on giving us the skills and the understanding of how, around pedagogy. And specifically for me, it was business studies and physical education. Those were the two topics not taught at the same time. And then somehow, Brian, I ended up and I know your former workplace as well, in Google. And I joined in Dublin in 2013. I worked in the ads business, but really used the opportunity in Google to continue to develop my, passion and craft for learning, design, and facilitation. Then I managed to move to Singapore and continue to deepen that in the context of Google, where I joined the people development team in the Asia Pacific region, based out of Singapore. Did some Noogler onboarding or new hire onboarding, but also got my hands into other projects related to leadership and team development. I moved to London, then took on a role in tech staffing. I became a recruiter in London. And as I tell people, that was a very much, sometimes our moves are professional, where we pursue a specific opportunity or role or career or entrepreneurship that's going to feed the kind of professional desire in our lives. The move from Singapore to London, I met someone, fell in love, met my partner there, and then we wanted to move back west to be closer to family at the time. So I took a role that was a little bit maybe off the track for me in recruitment, but I was able to develop skills around kind of client relationships because
Yeah.
that's your role, you're supporting clients. So that's where I ended up in London. And then my final kind of jump with Google was in Dublin, where I took on a global L&D lead role for a sales org called OPG, online, I think, partnerships group. And I work with them on their kind of L&D strategy and execution. So that's kind of the early jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And so I think that's an interesting thread that you draw there, where you talk about the journey from London over to Singapore, back again, and then into Dublin as well. So that you can see, first of all, there was the roles that you were interested in, and also the geographical things you're interested in. I think a big organization allows you to do that while constantly building the skills. And so at some point during, I assume, that final role you had at Google, you started to think there's something more. And eventually you made the call. Was there anything in particular that happened in between those times that made you go, you know what, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I think most people make a decision to go out on their own and start something. It's it's a myth that it's overnight.
Yeah.
That decision is often, months, if not years in the making. And I suspect it's the same for you and perhaps some of your other guests. Certainly for me, I wanted to leave Google for about 3 years.
Mm.
And honestly, and in London, I was like, I want to move. And I looked at other opportunities outside of Google. And then I ended up sticking with Google to move to Dublin because I thought, oh, maybe if I do the in-house role in L&D, that will be enough. But it was very clear to me when I arrived in Dublin within about 6 weeks, I was like, this is not really where I can be as creative or as entrepreneurial as I would like. And so for me, it was years in the making. I think what really drove me to do it was the personal goals, which often is how I try to combine my personal and professional goals. I like there to be synergy and alignment with that.
Mm.
And one of the big things that I was trying to do at the time, I was working in Dublin, but I was really splitting my time between Belfast and Dublin, where I'm from. And I really wanted to move to Belfast. And when I looked at the market in Belfast, Brian, there was nothing that was very clearly a good fit for me, or vice versa. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna have to be creative and try this by myself. And that's what really led me to kind of take the punt and set up People Playbook.
When did you actually leave and start the new company?
Oh, yeah. My last day of getting a full-time paycheck was February 26th, 2020. The week after I was in London, early March 2020, and I was with a client in London, and I was like positioning some manager development. We were kind of starting to design and scope out what it would look like. And as we all know, March 2020, as things moved east to west, things started to shut down. And my first client, Brian, was going to be, and obviously then was not going to happen during COVID, was a co-working space.
Oh, wow.
A brilliant co-working space in the UK called Work.life. And I work with a guy there who's now just been promoted to CEO, Paul Dutnell. And Paul and I were scheming. I remember we were in the office, Brian, and we were looking at the TV. And I'd scoped out a really nice piece of work, like for a first client, and I just left Google. I had all the energy, and on the TV, we were watching obviously the health crisis that was happening.
Yeah.
And Paul was like, "Oh, that'll be fine. We'll have you back in 2 weeks."
Yeah.
Needless to say, I did not return to London for quite some time,
Yeah.
and that was the start of my journey.
Oh, wow. And so there wasn't even a chance to take that work remote. So, well, like that's a serious jab to the plans in the early days. How did you work with that in the coming weeks?
Well, yeah, there's the old saying here, God laughs when you're making plans. So look, I'll be really honest, and I was chatting to someone about this morning, actually, over coffee. My approach to growing People Playbook has been fairly intuitive, fairly emergent in terms of strategy as things arise. When I started it, and I was in the bedroom, right, starting my business from a tiny little double bedroom that I shared an apartment with my brother at the time, and really the goal was simply, I think, as you described it, was to do the work that I enjoyed, to serve people, and to get paid a few quid to be able to sustain, living. And
Mm.
And that was the extent to which there were plans made. And that really served me early on in that I can't be disappointed if I don't have high expectations.
Yeah.
And so I think my expectations were appropriately placed
Right.
versus others who I see really struggle in their journey of entrepreneurship when they think perhaps they're going to start launch a product, find a product market fit, make loads of money, be super happy, and have all the time in the world to sip
To
coffee and take it
enjoy it.
easy.
Yeah.
But the reality is, all I wanted to do was do the work that really lit me up. That I believed, having heard from others, that would help other people. And outside of that, Brian, so it didn't really, COVID ended up being, from my business side, in many ways, a real advantage because it opened up the marketplace for me in a way that it wouldn't have. So if you imagine starting off in Belfast pre-COVID, thinking about, right, well, I'm going to live in Belfast, but I'm really going to be in London, or I'm going to
Mm.
be in Dublin, and I'm going to be commuting and moving around the world doing the work that I now continue to do. But at the time, it was going to require a lot of travel. And then when that stopped, yeah, there was a moment where I thought, oh, this will be interesting now. I mean, but I wasn't really established. I was sort of figuring it out. When that stopped, all of a sudden, I had a client in Australia
Yeah.
and a client in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi. I had clients in the US, and all of a sudden, the marketplace really shifted and opened up. And I think I was well placed because, like yourself, we've had experience working in multinational global companies, working remotely, working
Mhm.
online, and I was very comfortable with that. And so, as I say, COVID for me actually, and for our business, was it became created a competitive advantage for a new business that was
That's
set up
really
in Belfast, although I didn't tell anyone I was in Belfast.
well, the Belfast thing, actually, I did want to ask about. You were intentional personally looking to move back to Belfast, but also you wanted the business, or you've always wanted the business to be based out of Belfast. What's your sort of motivation and thinking in that one?
Well, there's a terrible tension here, Brian, and those closest to me know this. I haven't shared this before, but the tension is I am so proud to be from this city. It's my home. It has been, obviously, since I was born. I was born and raised here, and although I've traveled and lived in different places around the world, I've just always felt connected to Belfast. And yet, when I started the business, I didn't put on LinkedIn or social media that People Playbook was Belfast based. And hear me out, even before the judgment arises.
Before
I
people just hit stop.
The reason was I definitely wanted to be international. I
Yeah.
knew that I knew that I wanted to work with global companies or people from different parts of the world. It's such a joy. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason, on a commercial economic perspective, was I really didn't want to be pigeonholed as kind of a little kind of business, tiny
Mm.
business based in a tiny town. And I just didn't really want to, yeah, kind of fall into the trap of being discounted or for our
Yeah.
status to be diminished. Brian, it's shocking to me that, like, years later, that's been a lesson that actually I've learned that that was wrong, because a lot of clients love that we're not New York, we're not London, we're not Hong Kong, we're not Sydney, and they actually really enjoy the fact that we are this kind of global team based in Belfast. And actually, it's been strangely become a bit of a competitive advantage. It's much more memorable than
Yeah.
every other London-based agency.
I think it's really cool, and I think my interaction and experience with your business has been an extremely Belfast centric, Belfast proud business. And I agree with you. I think it's something that stands out. That's very, very notable. Like, a lot of the folks that you work with are from around the area, and it's really evident and comes through really strongly that it's part of who the brand is.
Yeah, I think you were the first person to actually say that to me, as you've just described. I remember I think you said something to me along the lines of, it's clear how kind of the Belfast culture has seeped in even internationally. And you are right. I mean, just I know we're recording this in October. What year is it? 2025. I mean, just last week we had our full team together in Ireland,
Yeah.
and we had a theme that was based around an Irish proverb. In Gaelic, it was "Tus mai lach na hibre," which means a good start's half the work. And so to go from hiding the fact that we were based in Belfast to having an Irish proverb as the theme for an offsite for our team of about 25 people, it was, yeah, it's a heck of a journey. And I've really leaned into that.
So at some point, Tony, this moved beyond the bedroom, and yourself and David were gathering the business together. At what point did it switch from just being a couple of lads putting this together, being really happy and having the few quid, to being into a scale organization, working with the type of clients, the size of clients, and size of events that you have been doing?
Yeah, that's an important reflection for me because, at a certain point, I was aware that the business really depended on me to be the sole kind of, client liaison officer, delivery expert, learning designer. And, I never really wanted that. I always wanted to bring different people in, but the emphasis was really on me leading. Up until about, not about, specifically 2023, we had a huge event scheduled with 150 managers and a brilliant client organization called Travel Perk, and it was in Barcelona. It was a five-star venue. Travel Perk don't mess around, Brian. As you know, you have a high bar also for excellence, and we had this event planned for 6 months, and it was our single largest event that we'd have in terms of both revenue and number of participants, of leaders. And quite, yeah, shockingly, my mother passed that week, and she passed away on the Monday. The event was on a Thursday,
Sorry
and
to hear that.
yeah, and like, understandably, everything else fades to black. It doesn't really matter. But equally, you know, I have a I have a commitment to uphold to the client, and of course, I was raised by my mother to work hard and follow through and do right by people, and I was never going to let that slide. I just knew I couldn't possibly be there to deliver. But at that point, I was scheduled to do so. I was scheduled to be in Barcelona with the team and kind of lead the event alongside our comedian, Jared Christmas. And it was in that moment that David, rallied and helped find a replacement, a collaborator of ours called Connor Swenson, ex Google, charismatic, great facilitator, and he moved things around to be there, and so he covered me, and it was absolutely just an amazing gesture of friendship and support professionally as well. So he stepped in, which was incredible. But I'll remember at that moment going, I never. I was like, I never want that to happen again. Where it had to be a consideration, and that I didn't want it to be a consideration. I didn't want for me to be a single point of failure, and I never wanted to feel under pressure about work whenever I had something that was absolutely much more critical around family and life. So that honestly, like pretty quick after that, David and I spoke, and I said, this is never going to happen again. In that, I don't want to be under pressure to have to work around things that are really much more important in life. And so he agreed, for both the health of the business and the health of me and the health of him and just in general health. And we quickly moved to a playmaker first model.
I mean, that's a shocking and upsetting motivation to make such a decision, but I think very real nonetheless. And yeah, it really shows again the thoughtfulness and the intention that you put behind, from a business point of view, from a people point of view, and those hiring decisions. So the full-time staff you have, you've got your business partner David, and then the other folks. What are their roles?
Yes, we've got David, and David's new title or working new title is head of enablement. His role was originally operations manager, but that felt diminutive because his role goes far beyond that. He looks at the financial health of the business and how we can, be proactive and looking forward. I'm much more useful at big picture and then what's in front of me and nothing in between. And he kind of covers me in that. So head of enablement, making sure the workflows, the process, the structure, everything works for everyone to do their best work of their career, right? That's how we want to work. And obviously with our clients, right? Because if our team is doing their best work, they're supporting the clients in the best way possible. We've got Erica, who's currently on a kind of month-to-month retainer, but has been with us for, oh my goodness, almost a year now in Denver. She is a brilliant Swiss Army knife of program management, learning design, facilitation, consulting, working with clients, can do a bunch of different things. And then our fourth full timer is Adam in Dublin, and Adam is just an exceptional creative wizard. He is responsible for anything with our visual brand, whether that's our website, our socials, our playbooks, which of course we're doing. We're People Playbooks, so we're creating these beautiful, physical documents that become living, breathing resources as part of our learning experiences. But he's kind of the visual artist within our organization, and I have found that to be one of the greatest investments. And I know you and I had this conversation when you were getting started around, and you've done an amazing job with this Day One Diaries. I think it's just a wonderful, well put together offering, right? That really
Mhm.
reflects your quality and professionalism. And I think that in the work that I do and that we do in People Playbook, Adam's magic touch visually helps elevate us into, into the space of, this is a real high, we have a real high bar for excellence in how we present ourselves. And then there's the pedagogy, right? Being able to create new ideas through card games or board games, with Adam's input has been really critical. So each of those four play a really central role in what we do.
But I do want to check on this because, when we were talking about starting off early COVID, you weren't fully sure where this business was going. All you want to do was feed yourself and keep the few quid coming in. But at the same time, if there wasn't too much of a plan, you've certainly been very intentional about how all this looks, what you want this experience to be like. Like you say, hiring a designer as staff number 3 is a very unusual move in any space, let alone this space. So where does that notion that the experience needs the investment come
Mhm.
from? How have you come up with that?
Yeah, I think my experience of using the sense of sight that I've been blessed with, and again, it's a privilege to be able to see things and kind of visually take them in through your eyes. I think, I enjoy visual things. I enjoy art. I enjoy performing art. I enjoy just looking at different stuff. And I enjoy when I see something beautifully designed and it hits me and I think that's so cool looking. So I really have a bias towards that. Uh, I also think that in our industry, looks matter, in that how you visually represent your business really matters. And that's the difference between, an excellent organization that really cares about how they present themselves, and an organization that maybe does really great work, but you wouldn't even get in the door with that, or you wouldn't even invite them to dinner to have a conversation about working with them because it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
My old business studies teacher, Miss Anderson, she used to say, Tony, perception's reality. And if I want to be perceived to be excellent, then I have to
Yeah.
create that perception and do everything in my power and control to show this is who we are. We are purposeful, we are practical, we are playful, and this shows up in how we visually present ourselves. And that's the reality. And it communicates something.
It's interesting the way you speak about that because from the early part of the conversation, you're trying to make this work, you're talking to the one or two clients and you're trying to build it up. You're very much into the leadership space at this stage. Has that something that happened organically for you, or is it something that you had to realize, oh, actually, this is something that I need to step into now?
Yeah, much more the latter. And I don't know what the quote is. I feel like David would do it well, but it's like the people in power who really want to be in power, you don't want in leadership positions. You don't want them if they're craving it. The whole thing of leading people and leading the team is becoming, yeah, more and more central to my role in setting us up to do the best work we can. And yes, thankfully we've established a great team overall that are bought in first and foremost to how People Playbook designs and delivers learning experiences. And if they're on board with that, actually, and now that we're finally clear on what it is, the structure, format, ingredients look like, it's easier for them to say, yeah, I'm really bought into the principles. And then the rest is very easy because the expectations are set. I think the two things, Brian, I'm going to share that are top of mind when it comes to leadership that I'm trying to instill as cultural tenets, as things that are habitual in our organization, that this has given me a platform to share. And then I'll share Day One Diaries with them and say, great, listen to this part. Um, but and there are two things that I don't think happen in organizations that we serve and support who are our clients, right? When we're establishing some leadership norms, some team norms. One is, not only is it okay to say, I'm sorry, I expect people to first and foremost look at themselves in the mirror before looking at others and say, I'm sorry, I could have been more clear. I'm sorry, I should have thought about that. Or I'm sorry, I could have reached out to that client last week and not this week. And this concept of saying sorry, and you and I both know from our experience, uh, has been challenged where people are saying, "Oh, you shouldn't," and you come across too vulnerable and like incompetent. And I know I check my privilege because I've had this conversation with other women in recent weeks about this. That I know it's difficult as much as I can know for women in parts of the workplace where actually saying sorry might discredit them or be seen to do that. So I know it's harder. I'm trying to create a culture where saying I'm sorry and not thank you for your patience uh, is more acceptable. When
Yeah,
people say thank you for your patience when they're late, as opposed to I'm sorry I'm late.
yeah,
I just think it's so critical. And when I work with people in my team, I'm becoming more and more explicit that saying it's okay, this is a safe place. You're not going to be dinged for it moving forward, but you will be dinged for it if you don't own it and use the words I'm sorry, because language is so, so critical. How does that sit with you as a concept?
I find it so fascinating that you articulate that, because it's one of the real difficulties I've seen in big business over the last, as I finished up over the last 2 3 years, that I don't know, maybe it's the culture of redundancies and the pressure that everyone feels, and all businesses putting more and more pressure on their staff. It feels like you can't even be seen to nearly make a mistake, and your performance review is constantly on your mind. And if you make one mistake, that you're going to get dinged for that, or one senior manager saw it, and that means you're not going to get the promo. And so there's this world that people feel like they're walking this tightrope of constantly forcing themselves to do everything so right, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do the work before the work starts, and then go into work like, oh, I'm all cool, I'm on top of this, and I don't make any mistakes. And pure swan stuff under the water, they're absolutely killing themselves. And so I think it's a brilliant culture to develop, to just say, look, it's all right to make a mistake. It's all right to miss an email, to make a boo-boo here and there, say slightly the wrong thing in a session, but as long as you can recover it and people generally get the point, it's all right. It's cool. Learn from it. Show that you're learning from it is more important than getting it right every time. And I think this is something that's lacking in business at the moment, and it's only going the wrong direction, in my opinion. So I think it's a great thing to try and develop, both in your own business and the ones you train.
Yeah, and it's hard, and I get it, and I know it's countercultural in some ways, but nobody wins when we avoid it. I just know that for me personally and me professionally, and knowing the context of organizational culture now, so having some level of expertise, creating a world where people can say, "I'm sorry, I've got that wrong," is just gonna be more advantageous for everyone, including and especially business performance. I think it's absolutely critical because then people own it, people feel more connected to each other, they feel safer. Then you can identify mistakes easier and say,
Yes.
"Brian, I know you've said sorry 3 times for this thing. Let's talk about it because it's clear it's happening
Yeah.
regularly," as opposed to, as you say, you're frantically trying to hide errors. So look, the second thing I want to share
Yeah.
is around the cultural stuff in leading is one is, yeah, I'm sorry, and that's okay. And then of course you have to make sure as a leader you're not going, all right, you've told me your mistake, you've apologized, but now I'm going to hold it against you, or I'm going to bring it up at a performance review because that's inappropriate. The second sort of cultural thing that I really want to instill in People Playbook, and actually we've really got a great strong foundation for it, is that we more regularly invite feedback. And I know that is kind of corporate jargon, BS in some ways, right? Invite feedback. Oh, invite feedback. Oh, Brian, how did you think I do? But I genuinely mean like starting to get in or getting into a culture where it's not only like it's a nice to have or it's a thing that you check off your list. It's such a thing that you do habitually. Like I'm guilty of not asking for feedback And it's really difficult to give someone feedback if they don't ask for it. And I've
Yeah.
noticed it recently in a couple of other engagements where I've wanted to give feedback, but I've held back because I haven't been invited to give it. And so
Right.
what I'll start to try and do more of is, post meetings, post interactions, post workshops, etc., is start to say, look, I'd love to know what went well, what could have made this better. But I think the responsibility is in particular on our playmakers, these kind of experts who are seasoned facilitators, to role model, and at the end of the session, ask the musician, ask the event producer,
Yeah.
right? Who in other organizations might just be told, do your job and just let the talent, let the facilitator do the thing. I'm not interested in that,
Yeah.
Brian. I think it prevents reaching greater performance levels.
I think so. And I think one way to build that culture is to encourage everyone to provide something positive, something constructive. Because once you sort of have that permission structure in place to say, look, I got to say something, right? Then you might as well say the real thing and not just something wishy-washy. And so building that in to say, like, tell me something that was good about the interaction, the session, or whatever, plus anything I can do that's better, just gives people that space to say, all right. And that builds the culture and builds people's confidence and psychological safety that, look, what's been said here is for the good of you, for the good of the room, for the good of the business, etc. Well, listen, Tony, you, my friend, worked in one of the biggest, most technologically advanced companies in the world in a number of countries. And the ice cream machine was downstairs, the pizzas were being served. Life was sweet. And you decided to make the jump, go back to Belfast, build out People Playbook. You happy you made the call?
Oh, best decision ever career
Yeah.
wise. And anyone that has done it, I think, and I remember at the time, Brian, deciding, oh, will I go out and try my own thing? And I remember sending a number of people who were also freelancers or entrepreneurs. And I said, but look, if this thing doesn't work, I'll just get a new job. And every single one of them said, once you go this direction, you can never go back. And God, I think they were right.
All right, Tony, it's been a pleasure to have you on Day One Diaries. And I'm really, really impressed by what you've built in a relatively short period in the challenging times of COVID, etc. But I think it's the vision, the creativity, and to quote yourselves, the practicality, the playfulness, and the purposefulness of the business that has been really the shining star throughout this period. So congrats on everything and all the best for People Playbook on into the future.
Oh, thanks so much, Brian, for having me on. I think the Day One Diaries is such a wonderful concept, and I can't wait to continue to follow the different guests because I think we can all learn from one another, whether we're in full-time roles, thinking about entrepreneurship, or we're in our position of actually doing the thing. I'm just so grateful that you're putting this art into the world. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me as a guest.
Pleasure, man.